At 11:47 p.m. on Halloween night, 1992, 14-year-old Charles Patterson made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He had no idea that touching a single glass container would connect him to something that had been waiting in the darkness for 30 years. 6 teenagers entered an abandoned department store that night. What they found inside wasn't just a relic of forgotten American retail. It was a laboratory. And when Charles made contact with that cursed sample, he didn't just touch condensed terror. Something touched him back. Greetings, fellow architects. If you've been following our Midnight Harbinger series, you might be wondering, where did all this actually take place? What kind of teenagers walk into an abandoned building at midnight? And how does a discount department store become ground zero for supernatural horror? Today, we're going to investigate the real-world elements that made the Zayre incident not just possible, but inevitable. Because the truth is, this wasn't random. Every piece was perfectly positioned for disaster. So, let's start with the place where it all began, and why some buildings are designed to trap more than just customers. Picture this. It's 1991. The Zayre Corporation has just filed for bankruptcy, leaving hundreds of empty buildings scattered across America, like abandoned monuments to failed capitalism. But the Maple Creek location wasn't just a casualty of corporate collapse. This building had a secret that made it infinitely more dangerous. Because, according to county records I spent weeks digging up, this building wasn't originally constructed as a retail space. It was built in 1963 as the Midwest Behavioral Studies Institute. You see, the institute operated for exactly 3 years before shutting down, with no public explanation. And their specialty? Fear response research. Now, we're talking about the era of mkultra here, government-funded psychological experiments that would be considered torture by today's standards. But the institute took it further. They weren't just studying fear, they were trying to harvest it. Here's what makes this terrifying. When Zayre bought the building in 1974, they converted the upper floors for retail, but they never touched the basement labs, they just sealed them up. So for 18 years, customers walked above those sealed labs, completely unaware that beneath their feet lay equipment designed to extract and concentrate human terror. And by Halloween 1992, that building had been empty for over a year. Psychologists call these liminal spaces, places that exist between purposes. They're not homes, not businesses, just empty shells. And our brains don't know how to process that emptiness. But Charles Patterson was different. This kid had been experiencing what his family dismissed as nightmares for months leading up to Halloween night. The episode started in late summer of '92, right around the time construction crews had been doing renovation work near the old Zayre building. Some people are more sensitive to environmental changes than others, and if that building really had been used to harvest and store concentrated fear, Charles would have been picking up on those residual energies long before he ever stepped foot inside. That building was calling to him, and on Halloween night, he finally answered. Now, let's talk about the people who walked into that cursed building. Because when you analyze the group dynamics at play, you realize this wasn't just 6 random teenagers. This was a perfect storm of psychological vulnerabilities. Jason Miller, 17 years old, high school senior. Look at his eyes in this picture. That's someone who's never been told no. Classic alpha personality, he's a natural leader. But here's the crucial detail. Jason was experiencing what psychologists call transition anxiety. It was his senior year, college applications looming. The pressure of adult decisions he just wasn't ready to make. And kids like Jason often engage in increasingly risky behavior as a way to assert control over their changing world. He needed to prove he was still the fearless leader everyone believed him to be. And then there was Mike Thompson, also 17, Jason's best friend since childhood. Mike's entire identity was built around being Jason's right-hand man. Whatever Jason suggested, Mike validated. It's a dangerous psychological dynamic, the enabler who can't say no because that would mean questioning his own worth. These two had been feeding off each other's bravado for years. But that night, their relationship became something more dangerous than friendship. It became a feedback loop of escalating risk. Then there's Lisa Jeffries and Chris Wilson. Both 15, the followers in group psychology. They represent what we call social proof seekers. They go along because everyone else is going along. But here's what's interesting. Their fear actually feeds the group's excitement. The more scared they get, the more the others feel like they're accomplishing something significant. Then we have Zayre Patterson, 16, the mediator. Look at her face. That's someone carrying weight she shouldn't have to carry. She's trying to keep everyone safe while not appearing weak, but Zayre was also dealing with something the others didn't know about. Her mother, Eleanor, had been making frequent doctor visits. Zayre suspected something was wrong, but her mother wasn't talking. That added stress made Zayre more protective of her younger brother, but also more distracted when she needed to be the most alert. And then we have Charles, 14 years old, the youngest, the outsider being initiated into the group. Look at his eyes in this photo. That's not normal teenage anxiety. That's someone who's been hearing things others can't hear. Charles wasn't just psychologically vulnerable, he was physically vulnerable. That building had been calling to him for months, and his older sister, trying to help him fit in with her friends, had unknowingly delivered him straight to the source of his torment. Put this exact combination of people in a location with that dark history at midnight on Halloween, and what happened next wasn't just possible, it was destiny. At 1:33 a.m. on November 1st, 1992, 6 teenagers discovered something that should never have been found. Behind what used to be the employee break room, they found a reinforced metal door, and behind that door, a laboratory that had been sealed for decades. Zayre later told investigators that the temperature dropped at least 20 degrees the moment they opened that door. Charles said he could hear whispers, not from his friends, but from the walls themselves. But what they found inside defied all rational explanation. Glass containers, dozens of them, some empty, some containing organic samples that glowed with their own internal light. The teenagers described them as viscous, pulsing, and unnaturally warm to the touch. Now let's approach this scientifically. What could create bioluminescent samples that remain active after decades of storage? Bioluminescence is real. We see it in deep-sea creatures, certain fungi, some bacteria. But those organisms require very specific conditions to maintain their glow. They need nutrients, proper temperature, the right chemical environment. For samples to remain active in sealed containers for 26 years, we're talking about something that either isn't biological in a conventional sense, or something that has found a way to sustain itself on alternative energy sources. There's emerging research suggesting that intense emotional states, particularly fear and trauma, can leave measurable electromagnetic signatures in certain environments. Some researchers theorize these signatures can be recorded under the right conditions, like psychic fossils embedded in the very structure of matter. When I researched the original Institute's work, I found references to something they called fear harvesting. The theory was that intense terror could be extracted from subjects and concentrated into physical form. They believed fear was a form of energy that could be captured, stored, reintroduced to new hosts. If the Institute really was conducting these experiments, if they had found a way to capture and concentrate the electromagnetic signatures of decades worth of human terror, then Charles was about to become their greatest success. At 2 a.m., Charles Patterson made the worst possible decision when he reached out to touch one of those containers. Because according to every witness account, the moment his skin made contact with that glass, something fundamental shifted, not just for him, but for everyone in that room. From a neurological standpoint, Charles experienced massive sensory overload. The teenagers described it as pure terror. Not fear of something specific, but fear as a raw, concentrated force. Like touching a live wire, but instead of electricity, it was 30 years of accumulated human anguish. But this was different from documented cases of psychic contagion. Charles didn't just experience fear, he became a conduit for it. The teenagers reported hearing whispers, seeing shapes that weren't there, feeling a presence that seemed to feed on their own terror. And that's when they realized the truth. Those samples weren't just stored fear, they were bait. The moment Charles Patterson's skin made contact with that glowing sample, reality split in two. On one side, 6 teenagers experiencing the worst night of their lives. On the other side, something ancient, something hungry, finally finding the perfect host. But here's what's particularly disturbing. When I researched the original Institute's work, I found references to something they called psychic anchoring. The theory was that intense fear could create permanent connections between consciousness and location. The researchers believed they could use concentrated terror to, and I'm quoting directly here, establish permanent channels between dimensional barriers. Let that sink in. In simpler terms, they thought they could use fear as a bridge, a way to connect our reality with something else, something that exists in spaces between spaces, feeding on human terror like a cosmic parasite. Charles Patterson didn't just touch a sample that night. He touched years of accumulated terror, and when the 6 teenagers escaped the building, only 5 of them were still entirely human. Here's what haunts me about this case. Every piece of research I've found suggests these events really happened. The building exists. The Institute's records are real. The behavioral changes in Charles Patterson are documented. Which raises a terrifying question. If this story is true, how many other buildings in America are hiding similar secrets? How many other abandoned places are just waiting for the right person to walk through their doors? Of course, this is just a story, right? These things couldn't possibly be based on real events. But if you've ever done some urban exploring on your own, if you've been in those abandoned places that just feel wrong, leave a comment below. Tell me about the buildings that made your skin crawl for no logical reason, because sometimes the most interesting stories come from the audience. Next time on the Archives, we'll examine what happened when they returned to find answers at Wellington Hills Sanatorium, and why some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Until then, fellow architects, remember that some buildings are designed to trap more than just customers, and some stories refuse to stay buried. Thanks for watching.
Why settle for some of it when you can get all of it?
Get it all, get to Zayre and get it all.
It's gotta be a knockout, so I got to Zayre. It's gotta last.
It's gotta have a name I know.
So we got to Zayre.
Get it all,
It's gotta be a real value.
get to Zayre and get it all.
Exciting fashions, famous brands, honest quality, genuine value.
Get to Zayre